Good morning. James Green tells about a friend of his named Jason, who when he was 22 years old, he went over to go see his next door neighbors who just got back from a month-long safari in Africa. I mean, they had all these wonderful pictures and they had so many stories. And the more stories they told, the more he felt like he was hearing a voice say, "Come to Africa." It's something he had always wanted to do, but he'd always been so afraid. But the more he listened to these stories, the more something stirred in his soul, and he decided it was something he had to do. Even though he was afraid, the fear of not going, the fear of regret of not going, was greater than the fear of going. He decided to check into it. He started making calls. He found it was not as expensive as he thought it would be. It was still expensive, but he made a reservation. He made a commitment. And he started saving his money and making his payments. And 15 months later, he was on a flight to New York City where he'd fly from New York to Rwanda to begin this safari. He was scared to death. He was 23 years old. He'd be all by himself, meeting up with this group in Africa, and there they'd be going along. I mean, what was he going to see? What would happen to him? What if something really did happen to him? Who would care? He didn't know anybody on this safari. No, he was very anxious and afraid. But in spite of it all, he decided to go. And over these next 2 weeks, they would go to Mount Kilimanjaro and then to the Serengeti Plain. He would see elephants and lions and zebras. It was incredible. Everything that he hoped it would be. But it was in the third week that he was gone that they went to a place that was called the Barenge Mountains. And there it's more of a rainforest. And there they were going to go, and he was one of 4 on the safari who was invited to go on this gorilla walk. What happened was they got up early one morning, they began hiking up this mountain through all this jungle. And by the end of the day, they arrived at this metal corrugated little hut. It was only a place to basically spend the night and to sleep out of the weather. And then the next morning they got up early before daylight and they moved out into the jungle and they took their positions. They'd been told no matter what happens, you don't move, you don't run, you don't speak, you just sit and watch. And sure enough, they were in their places and they knew the gorillas were going to be coming this way, the guides, that's why they had them. And in a while you could hear them coming. And then you could smell them. And finally, you could see them. And Jason said they were so graceful as they were coming and moving. And it was an adolescent female gorilla that came up to within 3 feet of him. She came up and just stared him right in the eyes. He said they were so human-like. He sat there looking into the eyes of this gorilla, and they just stared and stared. Finally, the gorillas began to move on. He said the last hour had gone by in a minute. It was the most incredible thing he had ever experienced. And when it was all over, then they began to come back down that mountain, and he said he knew his life was changed forever. He just kept thinking this trip was more than what he had ever hoped it would be, and how he had almost missed it. If he had let his fears rule his life, he would never have gone on this experience. And he knew that from now on, he was going to say yes to his dreams in spite of his fears. It was Helen Keller who said, "Life is either a daring adventure or it is nothing. To say yes in spite of your fears is to make it into a daring adventure." Never underestimate what it was like for Peter and Andrew, James and John, when Jesus came by and said, "Come, follow me." To make the decision to follow Jesus into an uncertain future. They had no idea what was in store for them. Never underestimate the courage it took to say yes in spite of their fears to follow him, and how it changed their world, and it changed the world forever. You know, I really do believe God will lead you into an exciting future. All it takes is you to have the courage to say yes in spite of your fears. go out and